As the global economy teeters, European leaders are trying to convince their peers that nothing will be fixed until the whole system is replaced. But where to begin? Karl Polanyi described the situation we face today over 65 years ago in The Great Transformation, where he says, "The control of the economic system by the market is of overwhelming consequence to the whole organization of society. It means no less than the running of society as an adjunct to the market. Instead of economy being embedded in social relations are embedded in the economic system." The search for a new social architecture begins by re-embedding markets and private banks within our social structures through strict regulations as to what sorts of activities they may or may not engage in. Banks should never have been allowed to acquire insurance or mortgage companies, and certainly not stock brokerage firms, where they have recklessly, if not in a criminal manner, gambled and lost our money. Probably the central tenet of neoliberalism is that there should be no government interference in the marketplace. Oh, sorry, unless, as we have seen, the markets need money. That, somehow, is different. But when it comes to poverty, the Romano Commission, or Kyoto, well, no, we don't have the money. What's wrong with this picture? Well, let's follow the money. It has been said that whoever prints the money prints the news. So, who prints the money? Well, there are two ways to create money, either through a national bank or by the private banking system. A national bank may create money on behalf of the people, whereas private banks create money on behalf of, well, private banks. Further, a national bank may create money for social programs, infrastructure projects, and so on, whereas private banks create money for profit. Now, here's the point. Currently, in developed countries, national banks create less than 10% of the annual money supply needed by their governments. Private banks, then, create more than 90%. Essentially, our money supply has been privatized. So who, in the private sector, owns the money? And what does this mean? Before we answer that intriguing question, let's consider what exactly money is. Most people believe that money is a commodity, as if there were a big barrel of it. And once you run out, you run out. But that's not so. Money is a medium of exchange, as important to the lifeblood of any society as the medium of air is to breath and water is to life. Allowing private banks to create as debt and at interest more than 90% of the medium of money has to be the stupidest, most destructive thing we do. It creates an unworkable debt burden for governments and is a terrible injustice to citizens everywhere, reducing almost all of us to bank debt slaves through taxation and the deprivation of a social safety net. Banks, therefore, are at the very core of our economic and market difficulties today. So let's return to our question. Who owns the money? Because whoever owns the money, at least at this time in our history, rules the world. The market collapse began in the United States. The 8 families listed are the primary stockholders of the Federal Reserve System, which is neither federal, nor a reserve, nor a system. The Fed is a privately owned consortium of about 300 stockholders. Unlike the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Canada has as its single shareholder the federal government, which is to say, we, the people. The citizens of Canada have their own bank, yes? That's right, by law. This is very important to understand. The Bank of Canada is not a private bank. All we need to get our economy moving and to set a positive example for all the world to see is available to us in the pages of the Bank of Canada Act. We hear about the independence of the Bank of Canada, but being owned by the government, it is under government control. Section 14.2 of the Act clearly states that, should there emerge a difference of opinion between the minister and the bank concerning the monetary policy to be followed, the minister may give the governor a written directive concerning monetary policy in specific terms and for a specific period, and the bank shall comply with that directive. If this equation were to change, and a greater percentage of the money creation function returned to governments where it rightfully belongs, it would be a very, very different world from the one we live in now. What we really need is to find a leader, someone, somewhere, who first and foremost is not a wimp, who loves this country, who is willing to impose strict and forcible regulations on Canadian private bank practices and market activities, who understands the primary importance of the money creation function, supports proportional representation, who would open up security and prosperity partnership recommendations to public scrutiny, particularly in relation to the manufacturing sector. Of primary significance of all these points, it cannot be stressed enough, is the critical importance of the money creation function. Prime Minister Mackenzie King puts it this way: once a nation parts with the control of its currency and credit, it matters not who makes the nation's laws. Until the control of the issue of currency and credit is restored to government and recognized as its most conspicuous and sacred responsibility, all talk of sovereignty, of parliament, and of democracy is idle and futile. The search for a new social architecture begins with the recognition that neoliberalism is a dysfunctional ideology, that private banks and markets must be regulated, and that national banks should function on behalf of we the people. Such would be a first step in the shift away from a neoliberal market economy and towards, well, we'll finish with another quote from Karl Polanyi. The passing of market economy can become the beginning of an era of unprecedented freedom. Freedom not as an appurtenance of privilege, tainted at the source, but as a prescriptive right extending far beyond the narrow confines of the political sphere into the intimate organization of society itself. This may happen in a great variety of ways, perhaps even in a fashion as yet unforeseen.